All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Zelis, I want to direct your attention back to the exhibit number 561. Oh, sorry. I want to direct your attention back to the exhibit 561 for a moment, if we can.
Yes.
Prior to the recess, you withdrew one book from that brown bag, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the bag actually contained 2 books.
Yes.
And we found the second one during the recess.
Yes.
And do you recognize the second book?
Yes.
And those are the items that you found in Mr. Jackson's bedroom.
Correct.
Move that those items be admitted into evidence, Your Honor.
Other than objections previously stated, we have no objection.
All right. Admit them.
All right. At this point I'm going to hand you an exhibit that's been marked as 286 for identification purposes. Okay.
May I see it, please?
286, Your Honor. And it's a chart.
Oh, okay.
I'll show it to counsel.
Yeah, fine.
Do you recognize the floor plan depicted in the chart, 286?
It appears to be the upper bedroom portion of the 2-story suite.
Okay. Your Honor, I would purport at this time, like we did before, with the same admonition, that it does not necessarily mean that the numbers as to the dimensions of the room are accurate, but to be used to demonstrate this witness's testimony as to the locations of certain items. And that's what I discussed with counsel before.
I have no objection to that.
All right. It's admitted on that condition.
Now, Detective Zelis, if you could, for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, first of all, could you indicate for them the location? We're going to put the chart up on the board, if we can, Your Honor. And, you're going to need to mark on this. All right. I want to direct your attention to the exhibit 256. Now, can you indicate to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on this particular exhibit, where it was that you found, where the nightstand was located and the items that you found there?
The nightstand would have been approximately in this area.
All right. You're indicating to the lower right-hand far wall of the bedroom.
Correct.
Would you indicate that on the exhibit? All right. Would you describe for the record what you put there?
I drew a square, and inside the square I put NS for nightstand.
All right. Now, within that nightstand, you found some magazines, correct?
Yes.
And you found the picture of the Arvizo children.
Yes.
Okay. Would you just put a little, like a line to the nightstand thing, and write those in there? All right. Now, you've indicated to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury you found 2 books that have now been admitted into evidence as 561. Where did you find those in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Do you wish me to point?
Please.
There was numerous boxes and cabinets in this general area of this side of the bedroom.
You're indicating to the exhibit, 286, that down towards the left lower wall of the room.
Correct.
Okay. And would you, on the exhibit 286, please indicate generally where you found the 2 books that are now in evidence as 561?
Okay.
All right. And what did you put on the exhibit 286, the chart?
I drew a rectangle with a B for books.
Now, you told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you found a mannequin in the bedroom that you took.
Yes.
And do you have a photograph in front of you, which I believe is 153, which is in evidence?
Correct.
Do you recognize the item depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
And what is that?
It is the mannequin.
And can you indicate on the exhibit that's up on the wall there, which is a replica of 286, where you found the mannequin?
I first located the mannequin, it was on the floor generally in this area.
You're indicating, again, towards that far wall, and on this exhibit towards the lower left-hand part of it.
Correct.
All right. Would you please just put an M in the general area of where you found the item depicted in 153, the mannequin?
Okay.
Okay. Now, on the exhibit chart, 286, you told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you found the briefcase that's in evidence, that's 470, in a particular location below that bedroom. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are you able to show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the general area on the chart, 286, as to where the entryway to that closet is in relationship to the bedroom?
The entry door was on the bottom floor, right next to the staircase, so it would have been in this area here.
So towards the area on the chart where the stairs are, but just to the right of it, is that correct?
That is correct.
Would you please indicate on the exhibit chart, 286, just put the number, or just put, briefcase, in the general area of where you found the briefcase?
Okay.
And I've handed you a photograph that's marked as People's 72, which is in evidence.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And do you recognize, what is People's 72? Tell the jury.
It is a picture, downstairs, of the stairway and several entry doors. One to a closet, one into the actual room where the picture was taken. The stairs are what is depicted in this diagram here.
Diagram 286.
Correct.
Alright, could you put your initials on the door that led to the closet where you found the item 470?
Okay.
Alright, so we've now put up for the jury to see the photograph, 72, which is in evidence. And I notice it has a dark P and a Z.
Correct.
Those are your initials on the door that led to the closet where 470 was found.
Yes.
Now, I have a few questions about that, and then we're going to be done. With regard to the item 470, the black briefcase. Okay.
Okay.
Prior to the time that you went to the ranch on November 18, had you participated in an interview with the Arvizo boys, Gavin and Starr?
Yes.
And had they described to you an incident involving Mr. Jackson showing them adult materials?
Yes.
And did they describe to you where, the container that the adult materials were in?
Yes.
Why did you take Exhibit 470, the black briefcase?
Objection. State of mind is not relevant.
Sustained.
When you observed the item 470, can you tell us whether or not it matched the description given by the Arvizo boys?
It matched the description exactly.
Now, with regard to that particular Exhibit 470, and we can take that one down. And I want to show this one again. That's Exhibit 86, a photograph. With regard to that particular exhibit, did you testify before the grand jury?
Yes.
And did the grand jury request to be able to look at the materials inside of this suitcase?
Yes.
And were you the officer who was chosen to be the one to take the briefcase in and show them the materials?
Yes.
Did you allow anybody in the grand jury to touch any of those materials?
No.
Did you, in the course of showing those things to the grand jury, take any precautions so your fingerprints wouldn't show up on those materials?
Yes, I wore latex gloves.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Sanger.
You don't have to give me all of them. Just give me the one that was just up there. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Detective Zelis. Starting with the item we left off with there. This is item 315 as it was booked into evidence, right?
Yes.
So the entire briefcase, with all of its contents, was booked into evidence as Exhibit 317.
Correct.
You testified on direct that you gave it to Detective Padilla, who booked it into the evidence locker or into the evidence system in the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And he booked in, as you gave it to him, he booked in the entire briefcase and the contents, correct?
Correct.
And it was numbered item 317, correct?
Yes.
Now, I believe you said something about forensics on direct examination with regard to this. But I may be wrong. So let me ask you, was it your intention that the contents of this briefcase be evaluated and analyzed by the CSI or forensic unit at the Sheriff's Department?
No.
Did you think anything about that?
No.
You were wearing gloves when you seized this item, correct?
Correct.
And you put it in a plastic bag, correct?
Correct.
You didn't think forensics was ever going to look at this?
Well, I'm sure they would.
Okay, and you're sure they would for what purpose? Look at that for fingerprints, perhaps?
Perhaps.
Okay, do you think that would be pretty much a priority?
Possibly.
Possibly. And in 2004, March and April of 2004, in that time period, This briefcase was brought to the grand jury in Santa Barbara. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it was your understanding it had been to forensics, right, when you brought it in?
That I'm not sure of.
You're not sure. By the end of the grand jury proceeding, you came to realize that nobody had checked for fingerprints on these materials inside of Sheriff's Item 317. Isn't that correct, sir?
Yes.
That was kind of a shocker, wasn't it? It wasn't a shocker.
No, not to me.
You're kind of smiling. This, in fact, when that was learned, that's when you were sent in with gloves for the grand jury to look at the materials, so that they wouldn't be picking it up and handling it. Is that right?
Correct.
However, during the course of that grand jury, the contents of this briefcase, Sheriff's Item 317, was handed to Gavin Arvizo so he could look through it, see if he could identify it. Isn't that correct?
Objection. No personal knowledge, no foundation.
I think he's asking him if that happened, so I will overrule the objection.
I would not know.
So you weren't advised by the end of the grand jury proceedings that Gavin Arvizo had taken the contents of this and looked through it at the request of the district attorney?
Same objection.
No.
Sustained.
Okay. After the 317. I'm referring to item 317 for a reason. It is an exhibit here in court with a different number, but Sheriff's Item 317, this whole briefcase, was booked into evidence at the grand jury. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you were assisting the grand jurors to look through this material with gloves, it was in evidence, it was in the possession of the clerk of the court of the county of Santa Barbara. Is that correct?
Yes.
And after you assisted the grand jury in looking through this with gloves, it remained. This item 317, the briefcase and the contents, remained with the clerk of the Superior Court. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
And during the testimony in the case with regard to item 317, do you or do you not know? Let me withdraw that and start again. During the course of the grand jury proceedings, do you know how many witnesses were shown the contents of this briefcase, Sheriff's Item 317?
How many witnesses?
Yes.
I do not know.
And after you completed your assistance to the grand jury by wearing gloves so they could look through this material, do you know whether or not the court clerks wore gloves when they went through and inventoried all this material?
I do not know.
Do you know when this item was removed from the grand jury for the purpose of doing a fingerprint analysis?
I do not know. I did not remove it.
Okay, but you were one of the lead detectives on this case, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so in that capacity, it's your job to know pretty much what's going on in the case, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, and in the course of acting as one of the lead detectives on the case, you came to realize that fingerprints had not been taken until after this briefcase was released from evidence sometime in the spring or summer of 2004. Is that right?
That is my understanding.
Now, you were a deputy marshal. I just want some factual, and I don't mean to be rude in anything I'm asking here, but you were a deputy marshal to start with. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as such, you were employed by the county of Santa Barbara as, in part, as a bailiff in the Santa Barbara Municipal Court. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. And you also served civil papers, like complaints and subpoenas and divorce papers in civil cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
You did that for about 4 years.
Yes.
And then did you go to the sheriff's department when there was a merger of the courts?
Yes. We all became sheriff's deputies.
Okay. So when the municipal court was done away with and it all became a superior court, all the judges became superior court judges. The deputy marshals then became deputy sheriffs, if they wished to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you opted to do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
How long were you? Let me withdraw that. What was your first assignment when you were a deputy sheriff?
My first assignment was patrol.
All right. So you went out in a black and white and patrolled the streets and highways of Santa Maria and the environs up here. Is that right?
Correct.
And how long did you do that?
A little over 4 years.
Okay. And then you became a detective. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you have a particular assignment as a detective?
I was assigned originally to the Santa Maria station, and then shortly thereafter assigned to the Solvang station.
Okay, and you didn't have a particular detail that you were assigned to. You were assigned as a detective.
Correct.
Just to generally work in that capacity. You weren't doing narcotics in particular.
No. Criminal investigations.
You weren't doing sex crimes in particular.
Occasionally.
Occasionally. And occasionally you did narcotics, right?
Yes.
Okay. Occasionally you did just about everything that came through the door, right?
Yes.
And so at the time that you were assigned, in June of 2003, to work on this case, you had been a detective for about 2 years.
Yes.
Now, again, and I don't mean this in an offensive fashion, but just, there were a lot of detectives in the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department who had much more experience than you did in sex crime investigations as of that time. Isn't that correct, sir?
Yes.
All right.
Is it all right if I turn the light on?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Now, I'll work backwards a little bit here through what was said, since it's fresh in our mind. You mentioned that the Arvizo boys. You had interviewed the Arvizo boys. I think this was the way it was put. And the briefcase matched a description that they had given of a black briefcase, correct?
Correct. Except I think they used the word suitcase instead of briefcase.
So you found a black briefcase, and it seemed to be similar to what they were describing as a suitcase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether or not the Arvizo boys went through various rooms in Mr. Jackson's house when Mr. Jackson was not there?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Lack of personal foundation, personal knowledge. It's clear that he doesn't.
That's a speaking objection.
Sustained. The question is, do you know? So I'll allow the question.
Thank you.
Do you want it read back?
Please. Record read. I do not know.
Okay. When we're talking about evidence here, you have before you Exhibit 561, which is Sheriff's Item, I think, 365. Is that correct?
Correct.
And has that been received into evidence, Your Honor?
561.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. 561 is a bag that contained eventually 2 books here, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, sir, are you familiar in your training and experience with what's called chain of custody?
Yes.
All right. Can you hold the bag up, with the court's permission, so the jury can see it, just in general, and I'm going to ask you some specifics. Hold it still for a second. All right. Okay.
Excuse me, counsel. Can I consult with counsel before he asks the next question, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do I have a say in that?
Yes. Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table. I should have given you permission.
Excuse me 1 second. Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table. Okay. We're all up to date in Kansas City, here. May I proceed?
Yes.
All right. Detective Zelis, we were talking about chain of custody of evidence, right?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And you held the bag up. Could you hold it up again? And I'm going to ask you to just point out what happens when somebody opens the bag to look at it before you come to court. In other words, let me start this. It's a little easier to do it this way. When something's first put in the bag is sealed, correct?
Yes.
Can you show how that bag was first sealed?
It would have been sealed at the top, stapled, evidence tape put on it, and then initialed and dated with a marker.
Okay. And then when the bag is subsequently opened, what do you do? Do you just rip open the top?
No. You try to open it in a different area, and seal it in the same manner when the items are put back.
So you would hold that up again, if you would, please. In other words, this is a regular bag, as it were. It now has red tape all over it on the sides. That red tape was not on the sides when the books were first put in there, is that correct?
That is correct.
The red tape was then put on each side when the bag was opened for one reason or another.
Yes.
And then it was resealed. New red tape was put on that seam, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, when you came down here, you had 1 book in the bag, is that correct? Or, I'm sorry, When you say, when you came down here an hour before, whenever it was, there was one book in the bag, right?
I didn't bring the book down.
Were you asked to look at the bag?
Yes.
And there was one book in it when you first looked at it, is that right?
Correct.
And then at the break, somebody went back up and found another book, is that right?
It was still here in the courtroom.
It was sitting here someplace.
Yes.
Alright, the reason to be cautious about the chain of custody is to make sure you have the right items in the right bag when you come into court, is that right?
Absolutely.
Now, for Mr. Sneddon's benefit in the court, I will point out that we agreed that the bags could be opened so the items could be marked for court. That would be the last time. In other words, the last opening. We agreed that could be done without doing it right on the record.
Well, it was more than that. That they.
If there's going to be an argument, Your Honor, I'd ask we be heard elsewhere.
Proceed.
Thank you.
That's a good argument. I'll ask you to have the arguments elsewhere. I didn't realize how good that was.
Another county, maybe. Laughter. Alright, now, let's talk about the contents of that bag. And may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'd like to retrieve the contents of the bag. Let's have the bag and the contents. And I'll let you hand it to me. You don't have to put it in. Put it on top. And I'm going to take this back, if I may. Alright, the first book that was in this bag. The one that was there when you first looked at it, and the bag I'm referring to is Exhibit 561. The first book is by Robert Maxwell, is that correct?
I believe so.
Alright, do you know whether or not Robert Maxwell is a personal friend of the Jackson family?
No, I do not know that.
Now, you were at the initial walk-through of the search of the residence of Mr. Jackson, is that correct?
Correct.
When, in fact, I believe you were in the very first car that drove up to the front door, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, and you were with, for the most part, you were with Sergeant Robel during the initial walk-through, correct?
Yes.
Lieutenant Klapakis was there as well?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Sneddon showed up in the foyer at some point during the walkthrough, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and when you walked through the whole main house, is that right?
Correct.
And then did you also walk through the other areas, such as the office area, the security office, the video library? Did you walk through that building?
No.
Did you walk through the arcade building?
No.
Alright, so talking just about the main residence that you walked through, the main residence, did you observe a number of books in the main residence?
Yes.
Is it safe to say that there were probably thousands of books in the main residence?
I don't know about thousands. Maybe hundreds.
Hundreds. Okay. And in Mr. Jackson's, what you called his suite, the first floor, there were stacks of books in front of the big screen TV, is that correct?
To the side of a big screen TV, yes.
Along that wall?
Yes.
Alright, and then there was also a bookcase with books right next to that door that you showed us. That you showed us the inside of the door, but just outside of that door where the stairway is, that was a bookcase.
Yes.
With a lot of books there?
Yes.
There were also all sorts of books and magazines piled up in the upstairs bedroom part, is that correct?
Yes.
Just stacks of books here and there and all over the place, right?
Yes.
In addition to that, there were, in the main house that you went through, including Mr. Jackson's suite, there were a number of items that appeared to have been sent by fans. Would you say that's correct?
Yes.
And there were a number of items that seemed to have been given to Mr. Jackson or sent to Mr. Jackson by other celebrities, is that correct?
I don't have personal knowledge of that.
Well, did you see a letter sitting on the piano from Steven Spielberg, for instance?
No.
Did you see any cards from Liza Minnelli?
No.
Are you aware that any of those, that Liza Minnelli card was seized?
Yes.
So it was somewhere. You just didn't see it while it was sitting there.
Correct.
Did you see items that were original items signed by Walt Disney, for instance?
I didn't see that.
You didn't see that in the same closet that you were retrieving the black briefcase from.
There may have been some frames on the wall. I don't know who signed them.
And there was a lot of memorabilia from other movie stars, including Shirley Temple, and a number of other movies. Is that correct?
Yes. Memorabilia.
Memorabilia. And it appeared that Mr. Jackson had saved, in stacks or piles or bookcases or on the floor, all over his private quarters, he had saved a tremendous number of things that had been sent to him by other people, right?
Yes.
Alright, so you don't know where the Maxwell book came from, do you? You just found it.
I know it came from his bedroom.
Okay, and of all the materials that you observed, there were no materials of an adult nature or sexually explicit nature. There were no materials that were, in and of themselves, illegal to possess, were there?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay, and the magazines that you picked out, I won't put them back up unless you want me to. But the magazines that you picked out and you pulled out of the drawer to photograph on the bed, for instance, those are commercially available magazines. You could go to a store and buy them, right?
Correct.
Alright, can we have the screen again, please, Your Honor? And still up there is number 86. Did you determine the date of the top magazine, the barely legal?
I did not.
Were you aware that it is dated after the time that the Arvizos were at the ranch?
No.
And that hasn't come to your attention?
No.
Alright, you don't know. Of the materials you seized, you don't know when they were actually placed or stored or put wherever you located them. In other words, you don't know when they came to be there. You just know they were there on November 18, 2003, is that right?
Correct.
So you don't know what, of those items, was there, if any, in February or March of 2003, correct?
Correct.
You also indicated that you found exhibit. You can turn off the thing, Your Honor. Thank you. I think it's exhibit 338. You found a picture that appeared to be of the Arvizo children, correct?
Yes.
And it appears to be a picture. Well, maybe I could put it up, Your Honor, if I may. It appears to be a picture that was taken of the children and probably given to Mr. Jackson, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't look like a candid snapshot. It looks like some kind of a commercially prepared picture, is that right?
Correct.
Alright, when you looked through the house, just the main house that you looked through, Mr. Jackson had a tremendous number of photographs of adults, children, people of all sorts all over his house, did he not?
Yes.
And it appeared that quite a number of those photographs were, in fact, sent to him by fans or people who were sending him photographs. They weren't snapshots taken by Mr. Jackson, is that correct?
Correct.
Alright, I want to ask you about the mannequin and well, it's not here. Do you have the photograph of the mannequin?
Here it is.
Oh, it's up there.
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
What else do you have there? Let me see, so I don't make too many trips. Now, 153 I believe is in evidence, is that correct, Your Honor? In any event, I'd like to publish it. I believe it is.
Yes. 153's in evidence. You may show it.
Thank you. When you look at 153 and you have to wait a second, it appears to be a mannequin of a child, you said, right?
Yes.
Do you know if that is a mannequin that represents some member of Mr. Jackson's family?
I don't know.
Were you aware that someone had defaced this mannequin?
Yes.
Alright, and did you examine the mannequin to see the portion that was, in fact, defaced?
Yes.
Alright, I'd like to have I think it's 5033. This was marked for identification previously with another witness, Your Honor.
It was.
I'd like to approach the witness, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me show you 5033, and ask you, let me go back here to ask you a question, if I may. Showing you 5033, does that appear to be the portion of the mannequin that was defaced?
Yes.
Basically. And let me ask, does that appear to be an accurate depiction of the actual subject matter?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move 5033 into evidence.
It's admitted.
May I approach to retrieve it?
Yes.
Now, does it appear that somebody defaced this with a marking pen of some sort?
Yes.
Alright, Your Honor, I'd like to publish this, if I may.
You may.
standing. And I'm going to turn it first so you can see the evidence, exhibit tag, and then I'll show this here. So it looked like somebody had drawn this in on this particular doll, is that correct?
It appears that way, yes.
Did you find out who did that?
No.
You interviewed the Arvizos a number of times, the Arvizo children, Star, Devellin and Gavin, correct?
Correct.
Did you ever ask them if they did this?
No.
Excuse me 1 second. Did you ever have occasion to go up to Your Honor, if you wanted to hit the light, that would be okay. Thank you. Did you ever have occasion to go up to the administrative office for the ranch?
Yes.
And the administrative office of the ranch is up on the hill. Well, there are a lot of hills there. But anyway, let's try it this way. The administrative office for the ranch is not in the residential complex we just described down below, is that correct?
Correct.
It's up on a hill, right?
Yes.
And it's a working office, correct?
Appears that way, yes.
There's secretaries or assistants. There's a couple of executive offices of some sort.
Yes.
Okay, it's actually a metal building. Something you'd see on a ranch, I suppose. Is that right?
I didn't take notice.
Okay, and there's actually a fire department there. There's a bay with a fire truck there.
Yes.
Alright, now, in the administrative office, when you're up there, did you have occasion to see, on November 18th, to see the pile of materials that had been sent by fans within the last 5 to 7 days?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It assumes facts not in evidence and lack of foundation as to the date.
Sustained.
Okay. I'm talking about November 18, 2003. Is that when you were at the administrative office?
No.
Oh, I see. When were you at the administrative office?
The last search warrant, which was in December of 04.
Okay, alright, that's fine. You were part of the group that came to Mr. Jackson's house early in the morning on December. What was it 3rd of 2004? Is that correct?
I'm not specifically sure on the date, but it was December of 04, yes.
Alright, it was a Friday, was it not?
Yes.
And what time did you arrive?
I believe it was around 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning.
Did you arrive with the first car on that occasion?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Jackson and his children were in residence there, in their house at that hour?
That was my understanding.
Nobody called ahead to say, we'd like to come out to your ranch and look at things?
Not to my knowledge.
And how many people showed up that day from law enforcement, or associated with your search?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as beyond the scope of direct examination and relevance.
Are you saying that none of the seizures that he was testifying to on direct occurred on December 4?
That's correct, Your Honor. And I didn't ask any questions about December.
The question was the materials received from fans. And this is evidently when he saw them.
Well, no.
The question you asked was, how many people showed up on that search? All sustained the objection.
Okay. At some point, you went from the house area up to the administrative building, is that correct?
In 2004.
December of 2004, the Friday, which?
Correct.
Could be the 3rd. Okay. And when you went up to the administrative office, did you search the administrative office?
No.
Did somebody search it?
I don't believe so.
Were you given something from the office voluntarily?
No.
When you were up there and you went through the office, did you see a large pile of materials, of things, sent to Mr. Jackson from all over the world?
No.
Okay, let me. If I may, Your Honor, I'd like to show that Exhibit 72, which shows the door to the closet.
All right.
And that's been received. Okay, you indicated that that was the stairway that goes up to Mr. Jackson's upper bedroom area, correct?
Correct.
And what we're talking about, this is the door to his downstairs area, is that correct?
Yes.
And just to the left of that, there are bookcases, is that correct?
Yes.
And to the right of that, along the outside of that wall, there were piles of books, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, and around the piano, behind the piano, there are bookcases. The piano's on the other side of the wall in that room, is that correct?
I'm not sure if there was a bookcase.
And there were books piled up around and near the piano, is that correct?
I don't know.
Alright, and besides books, there were magazines, reading material of all sorts all over the place, right?
Correct.
Alright, now, where you put your initials there on the door, that is a long, walk-in kind of closet, correct?
Yes.
And there were quite a number of items stored specifically in that closet, is that correct?
Appeared so, yes.
Again, memorabilia, photographs, boxes, all sorts of things, right?
Yes.
And there was also clothing in there, correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, what I want to do is go to a question that Mr. Sneddon had asked you if you did these interviews. And, Your Honor, we can turn the light on, if you want. And, in fact, there were interviews which were done of the Arvizo children on the 7th of July 03, July 7th, 03, correct?
Correct.
And you participated in that interview, is that correct?
Yes.
You interviewed Devellin, Starr and Gavin on that day, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's tape recorded.
Yes.
And you have transcripts of the tape, correct?
Yes.
And then there were follow-up interviews on August 13, 03. You participated in those, is that correct?
Yes.
And again, you interviewed all three of the children at that time, is that correct?
Yes.
You then had the search, which was November 18, 03, correct?
Yes.
And then there was some brief interviews on November 26, 03, is that correct?
I don't remember that date specifically.
Well, do you remember a date in November? Was it the day of the month or you don't remember doing it at all? Did I say 26th or 25th? In any event, November 25th.
Of 2003.
Of 2003.
Interview with the children.
With Gavin and with Starr that were tape recorded and transcripts made.
I'm not sure.
Okay, would it help if I showed you a transcript to see if that refreshes your recollection?
Yes.
Take a look at that. My question was, were you there? I'm showing you a transcript of an interview. And I believe Detective Robel indicated he was there, if that helps you.
I don't recall this interview.
Were you advised of that interview at all by Detective Robel?
I would have to read it further.
Take your time.
He may have briefed me on the interview. I don't think he got into detail.
Alright, in any event, so what you're saying, you may or may not have known that there was an interview. You think you probably were told.
Correct.
And you don't think you were there.
I don't believe so.
Okay, the next interview was January the 19th, 2004, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were at that one?
Yes.
And who was at that interview?
Deputy District Attorney Ron Zonin. I believe District Attorney Tom Sneddon.
And who else?
Lieutenant Jeff Klapakis. Sergeant Robel. The Arvizo children.
Alright, did Sergeant Robel stay for the entire interview?
I do not believe so.
Okay, did you stay for the entire interview?
Yes.
Alright, may I retrieve my book, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, at the time of this interview, let's say before January 19th, had you ever seen the rebuttal video?
I don't believe so.
Alright, and this interview process started with a showing to the Arvizo children of the rebuttal video, is that correct?
Yes.
And before it was shown to them, they were, let me withdraw that. Before the rebuttal film was shown to them, the Arvizo children were told what they were about to see, is that correct?
Yes.
And after the film was shown to them, they were then interviewed on tape, is that correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Sneddon actively participated in the interview, is that right?
I do not believe so.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I want to direct your attention to Devellin's interview first, if I may. And in Devellin's interview, she was asked, in general, how they could have responded the way they did in this rebuttal film based on the allegations that they were making, correct?
Yes.
And specifically Devellin was asked about the handholding. Remember that?
Vaguely, yes.
Do you remember the scene in the rebuttal video where Janet Arvizo doesn't appear to know that she's even on film and she says, "Hey, get this, get this. Get us holding hands just like Bashir," and everybody kind of joins in as to what a good idea it is. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Alright, and do you recall asking her, did anybody ever talk to you or talk to Gavin and your mother that they should hold hands together, Gavin and your mother during this, and then it's unintelligible? Remember that question?
Yes.
And Devellin says, oh, yeah, because they wanted to, because the fact that they did the Bashir thing, they wanted my mom to do it so it could erase what they saw of Michael. Remember that?
Yes.
And later, as she was asked about the part of the video where they are calling Michael Jackson, Daddy, and talking about him as Daddy, and his family. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And her explanation for that was that Frank and Dieter told them to do that, is that correct?
Mainly Dieter is my recollection.
Okay, primarily Dieter. But you remember her talking about Frank as well. Frank told us, and Dieter told us at one point, too.
I recall mainly she mentioned Dieter.
Okay, now, did you interview the kids independently, or were they all sitting there together?
Independently.
They were all sitting there together to watch the film, though, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't record what they said during the film while the film was being played for them, did you?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Okay, did they say anything while the film was being played?
No.
Nothing at all.
They were instructed not to talk to each other.
Alright, when you talked to Gavin, let me withdraw that for a second. Before they saw the film, the Arvizo children, Gavin and Star in particular, had been confronted before that. Before they saw the film, they had been confronted by law enforcement as to the fact that there was a film in which they appeared to be very happy with Michael Jackson, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the use of.
I'll withdraw it. We won't say confronted. We'll say they were advised. They were asked.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
The Arvizo children, particularly Gavin and Star, were asked about the rebuttal film before they saw it.
I'm not sure.
Okay, and when you just briefly reviewed the Gavin transcript there from November 25, 03, was there any question asked about a rebuttal video at that time?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the question. He said he doesn't believe he was present.
Okay.
Sustained.
Were you advised that, before they saw the video you're the detective, one of the lead detectives in this case, right?
Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Okay, when you're sitting there on January 19, 2004, with Mr. Sneddon, Mr. Zonin and the other people, including your lieutenant and your sergeant, you were concerned about what these kids are going to say about this video, correct? You want to know what they have to say.
Yes.
Object. That's compound.
Sustained.
Okay.
Move to strike the answer.
Stricken.
You wanted to know what they had to say about the video, right?
Yes.
And so as the investigator, one of the lead investigators at that time, you were aware that the fact that the video had been discussed with at least Gavin and Star. I'm not talking about Janet Arvizo. That's another subject. But as to the children, it's been discussed with at least Gavin and Star the fact that there was a video where they portrayed themselves of being very supportive of Michael Jackson. That was discussed with them before.
This question is just going on and on.
Move to strike.
Start over.
Let me start over. Okay. Did you discuss? Let me withdraw that. Were you aware that the Arvizo children had discussed with law enforcement the fact that there was a rebuttal video before they showed up on the 19th to watch it?
I don't believe I was aware.
So you thought this was just cold, outside the box. Nobody had ever talked to them about it.
Your Honor, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
When you say you weren't aware, was it your belief at that time when they sat down that they weren't even aware you had a rebuttal video?
I don't know what they were aware of and what they were not aware of.
Well, as an investigator, the state of mind of the subject that you're interviewing is important, is it not?
Object. Argumentative.
Overruled.
Maybe I should clarify that.
No, you should just answer the question. Do you want the question read back?
Please. Record read. Yes.
Okay. Now, when Gavin was asked about the video, after he saw the rebuttal video on January 19, 2004, he said that Dieter had told them what to say. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he also said that 99.9% of what was shown on the rebuttal video was not true, or let me rephrase that. 99.9% of what was said on the rebuttal video was not true. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct.
Alright, you don't have a copy of this with you, do you?
I may have.
I think you attached it to one of your police reports. If it's not handy, I'll show you mine.
It may take me some time to find it. If you have it handy, that would be more efficient.
Alright, I think it was. I'll just show you mine. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you page 12. And you're welcome to read before and after, whatever you want to do, but I'm kind of directing your attention there to the middle of that page. I'd like you to read that. And then after you're through, tell me if that refreshes your recollection as to what Gavin said.
Okay.
Okay, and that refreshes your recollection.
Yes.
And he said, like 99% of the things weren't true, is that correct?
That Dieter, or they, were telling them what to say on the rebuttal video. Not what was said on the rebuttal video. What they were told to say.
And what they were told to say was the same they said they were saying. They were claiming it was the same thing that they said, was it not?
Object is argumentative.
Do you understand the question?
Well, I don't know the exact specifics of what Dieter told them to say prior.
The question. You'd be asking questions about the calling Michael, Daddy, and saying they were members of his family, and they were. All of those things were the subject matter of what you were asking about, correct?
Correct.
And he said Dieter told him to say it, right?
Of the things to say, yes.
And he said 99.9% of that wasn't true, right?
Yes, he does say that, to what Dieter told him to say.
Alright, never told you Dieter told him to say anything that he didn't say, did he? He didn't say, Dieter told me the moon's made out of blue cheese, but I wouldn't say it.
No.
Alright, now, on another issue in this same interview, well, let's set the stage by going back to the 7th of July interview. And let me ask you in general, during the 3 interviews that you had conducted, and there was a 4th one, the November 25th 03, but you don't know about that other than what you've seen, so I'll exclude that. Of the 3 interviews, July, August and January, was Gavin consistent as to when he claimed the acts of molest that he was alleging had occurred?
Yes.
In July, he said, it was one of the last days that I was staying at Neverland, correct?
Something to that effect. I believe so, yes.
Okay, and in August, he was not clear as to whether it was before or after the DCFS interview, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object, Your Honor. That.
Sustained. It's a conclusion. Calls for a conclusion.
Alright. Let's just go to the January 19, 2004, okay. In January of 2004, did he tell you that he was sure as to the dates when the molest occurred, the alleged molests?
That he was sure.
Yes.
No.
And at that time, he said he didn't know whether it was before or after DCSF, but that, you guys would know. Remember him saying that?
That's not what he said.
Okay, what did he say?
He was asked, and this is my recollection, he was asked of when the molestations occurred, and if they could have been prior, or if they were prior or after the DCFS interview. And he said, I think so, period. That's my recollection.
He thought so, that they were prior to it, before it.
I think so.
He said, I think so. And then he said, you guys would know, right?
No. He said we would know to when the DCFS interview occurred.
Okay, so you're interpreting that as, you would know when DCFS occurred.
Correct.
He didn't say, you guys would know when the DCFS interview occurred.
He indicated that we would know when the DCFS interview occurred.
Okay, so he said he thought it could be prior, could be before.
The molestations occurred.
Yes.
He said he thought so.
He thought so.
Yes.
Alright, and then you also interviewed Starr on that same occasion, on January 19th, is that correct?
Yes.
And once again, Starr's answer, after he saw the video, was that Dieter told him to use terms such as father and humble. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time you didn't ask him about using those terms before he ever met Dieter, did you?
No.
At that time were you aware that Starr and the rest of the family had sent cards to Michael Jackson in 2001 calling him father, talking about him being part of their family, using all those same terms that are on the video?
Can you repeat the question?
Could we have that read back?
All right. Record read.
I know cards were sent. I do not know the dates of when those cards were sent.
Did you ask him about those cards?
Personally, I don't think so.
So you didn't say, well, Dieter told you to say this, but you also said this in the cards. You didn't ask him about that subject matter.
No.
Were you aware that the family used that same language in dealing with other people such as Louise Palanker?
Can I object as to vague as to the same language? Because there's a number of different terms.
Okay, mommy, instead of daddy.
Sustained.
Were you aware that they were calling Louise Palanker mommy and saying they were part of her family?
No.
Using the same kind of language. Did you recently learn that?
No.
Are you still on this case?
Yes.
Okay, let me have just 1 second, Your Honor. Let me go one more time to the interview on January the 19th. And do you remember Mr. Sneddon actually asking questions in that interview, or making comments in that interview?
Which interview? Of which interview?
Of Gavin. Yes, of Gavin. January 19, 2004, interview of Gavin. Sorry.
I do not recall.
Okay, do you recall whether or not Mr. Sneddon expressed concern in the presence of Gavin, the complaining witness in this case, about why he made these kinds of remarks on the rebuttal video?
I do not recall.
Do you recall whether or not Gavin responded to Mr. Sneddon's remarks?
I do not know.
Okay, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
What page are you talking about, counsel?
13. I'm going to show you page 13, but you can read the whole thing if you want. Do whatever you want. I'm going to ask you if it refreshes your recollection about the exchange between Mr. Sneddon and Gavin Arvizo.
Okay.
May I retrieve the book, Your Honor? Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Before I ask you about what was said, let me put this in context. As an investigator, when you're interviewing a witness, you're supposed to get information. You're not supposed to convey to the witness what you would like them to say, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall now, having refreshed your recollection, that Mr. Sneddon said, so, in your mind, one of the things that you're thinking is, they're doing this video that they want you guys to do, that if you ever told them the truth about being molested by him, that nobody would believe you. Remember that question?
Yes.
And then Gavin Arvizo says, yeah, that they would use that and say that we're lying. That's what I think they used it for. I think that's why they told us to say all those things in the tape. They told us it was for so they could release the tape out to the media for rebuttal for what they were all saying. But I don't think they were, kind of forcing us to say those things. 99.9% of the things they were telling us to say weren't even true. So, and then the answer ends. Was that what Mr. Sneddon said and what Gavin Arvizo said in response?
Yes.
And at that point in the interview, as the investigator in the case, it was your understanding that what Gavin Arvizo was saying at that point is that he was claiming he was molested before the rebuttal, and that this was the rebuttal was to cover up a molest. Is that correct?
No.
Well, that's what Mr. Sneddon was asking, wasn't it? If you ever told the truth about being molested by him, that nobody would believe you.
Your Honor, that calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness. It's
sustained.
All right, excuse me 1 second. You may need to look at this again, so I'll let you do that if you need to. But just so we're clear on that, and Mr. Mezzaro was kind enough to direct me on this. Just so you're clear on this, just preceding this exchange with Mr. Sneddon, the question was asked, the acts of molestation, had they already begun by the time you did this video?
I'm going to object to this as asked and answered. He's just reading. There's no question pending.
No, I'm going to allow him to read that. I assume it's the preface to a question.
right?
Go ahead.
And I think you did refer to this, but to put it in context, the question. The acts of molestation, had they already begun by the time did you this video? Do you know? A. I think so. And then. Q. Within hours after doing the video was that meeting with the workers from the Child Protective Services. Is that how you remembered it, or you're not certain? A. I don't know. I'm not sure it happened, whether it happened before or after. You guys probably would know that date. That's what I had asked you about before. Is that all accurate?
Yes.
And then immediately following that, Mr. Sneddon says, so, in your mind, one of the things you're thinking is, they've done this video that they want you guys to do so that if you ever told them the truth about being molested by him, that nobody would believe you, correct?
Correct.
And then Gavin Arvizo essentially adopts Mr. Sneddon's interpretation.
It was. That question asked by Mr. Sneddon was a clarification of an idea that was given to us by Gavin prior to that.
So that he was molested before the video, and the video was done in order to negate any claim that he was molested.
No.
And you understand that other times, Gavin Arvizo has claimed that the molest occurred at the end of his stay at Neverland, not in early February or mid-February, correct?
Are you asking my understanding? I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Well, let me clarify it, if I may. Other times, you told us July 7th, he said it was right at the end of his stay. That would have been March, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know what he testified to here in court?
No.
You weren't here. Alright, now, let me go back to the beginning of your involvement in this case. You said you started in June the 13th of 2003, correct?
Correct.
When you took over this case, it already had a case number, is that right?
Yes.
Now, case numbers are assigned in the sheriff's department for each new case, correct?
Correct.
In other words, just because a person was involved in a case doesn't mean that person will have the same number, either as a suspect or reporting party or anything else, correct?
Correct.
A case number is assigned when a case is open, when an investigation is open on a particular subject matter, right?
Correct.
And it's your understanding that Detective Terry Flaw, had been assigned to go investigate this case when it was first opened, correct?
Yes.
Terry Flaw at that time, in fact, was the lead investigator on the case, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Let me withdraw that. He filed a report saying that there was no criminal activity, is that right?
Correct.
And that report was filed on April the 16th of 2003, correct?
I'm not sure of the date.
It was filed sometime before you got involved in the case, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then June 13th you requested his police reports and files, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever talk to Detective Flaw?
Yes.
When did you talk to him? Well, did you ever talk to him about this case?
I don't believe so.
Alright, so you took over the case and requested his reports, but you never talked to him about the case.
Correct.
And then about a month after you got involved in the case, Sergeant Robel was brought in, is that correct?
No, he was brought in right away.
Right away, meaning what? The 13th, 14th of June, or sometime later?
I don't know, you'd have to ask him. I don't remember.
Well, we did, but do you recall?
No.
Alright, when you were first assigned to the case, you were the lead investigator in the case, is that correct?
Correct.
And eventually when Sergeant Robel was brought in, he was then designated as the lead investigator.
Co-lead.
So you and he were co-lead investigators.
Correct.
All right, let's take our break.